Start huh? Trip of a lifetime. Let's fucking go. Alright, so the other day when I was working, I had an older lady as a passenger in the car, and she said to me, "Can I ask you a stupid question?" And right when she said that, I knew she was about to ask me some dumbass shit. I know the saying that there's never a stupid question. I believe that, but I believe it if you're teaching me something or if I'm teaching you something, then yes, no question is stupid. There is no stupid questions, because if it's stupid because you should know the answer, then apparently you don't, and you definitely need to know, so you need to ask the question. And it's also not a stupid question if the question makes no sense, because then just by asking the question, the person who's trying to teach you could kind of get what you're not comprehending and can kind of spin it in a way that is teaching you something so that you wouldn't even ask that question again because you would know better. But most questions that you ask an Uber driver are going to be stupid questions unless it relates to the ride or a question about driving rideshare. Like if you've asked me a question about my job, other than if it's busy today, that's always a stupid question. But if you ask me any other questions about like driving Uber, like what it's like my experience of driving Uber, I don't mind answering those questions. And if you ask me a question about the drop-off or something specific about the ride, then 100% you need to ask that question. But like I said, if it doesn't pertain to the ride or driving Uber, there's no need to ask me any questions. So any question is probably going to be a stupid question. So the lady goes to me, "What exactly is fantasy football?" The question was dumber than I thought it was going to be. She asked the question, presumably, because I was listening to the fantasy sports station on the radio. And it's a stupid question because there was no chance that she was going to comprehend what the fuck I was talking about anyway. She doesn't have enough baseline knowledge to comprehend what fantasy football is. Like, it's one thing if my pops asked me what fantasy football is, and he probably did ask me what fantasy football is, and I was probably able to break it down for him, and he probably understood what I was talking about. But she doesn't understand enough about football for me to break down what fucking fantasy football is to her. She kind of gave off the vibe of someone who may or may not watch the Super Bowl. But I did a terrible job of explaining it because I was like kind of rolling my eyes at the situation. Plus, I'm not good at explaining shit in the first place. Her response was, she was like, "Oh, that sounds like fun." I'm so sure she had any clue what the fuck I was talking about. But fantasy football is not fun. It's possibly the gayest shit in the history of the universe. It's so gay because of how little amount of money people put into it, for the most part, generally speaking. Playing for significant money is the difference between it being gay and arbitrary or being interesting and actually mattering. Like poker or any type of cards. Like, I love playing poker or cards, but I wouldn't play poker or cards for fun. Like, I wouldn't even play for $20 cash in at this point. Like, it's just not even worth the time. But in a casino, I'll literally sit at a poker table all day and all night, but I'm not playing cards for no money. But that's why fantasy football is so gay, because there's rarely significant money attached to it. Most leagues are like for $50 or $100 for the season, which is basically nothing on a weekly basis. But people take it mad serious. Dude, it's all about the pride. When people are on that shit, it's gay as fuck. But I'm a sports gambling junkie. Like, I mean, that's what my thing is, betting on sports. Betting on sports is straight, but the gay thing is when people bet $20 on a game and root for their team like their life is on the line. Like, that shit's gay as fuck. That's why this shit all hits so close to home. Because, like, for a recreational gambler, I'm a relatively big gambler, and I can't stand being around people who go crazy for a team when they got like a $5 bet on it against a friend. They're jumping out of their seat every single fucking play. When I bet on a game, unless I'm by myself, I'm silent when I watch it. Like, I'm not fucking bothering the people around me. But yeah, fantasy football goes from gay to being straight if you have significant money invested in it. But it's virtually impossible in season-long leagues. Like, season-long leagues are really rarely for a lot of money, unless like you're like doing it online and like you're entering a high-stakes league. But that's why fantasy football is so gay, because season-long leagues is what everyone always talks about for the most part. Just their $100 season league with their friends. Season-long fantasy football is gay. Daily fantasy football is straight, like DraftKings and FanDuel, because that's essentially gambling. But you have to do it for like enough money. When I play at, I usually have like $500 or like $1,000, and I put it all on this one lineup. Like I enter, they're called 50-50 leagues. Half the people win, half the people lose. And I just enter a bunch of those, like a bunch of $10, $25, $100 entries until I've reached however much I want to bet. But basically, like half the people win. If you're in the top 50 percentile, then you double up your money. If you're not in the top 50 percentile, then you just lose your money. So it's basically like, it's not like the winner wins this huge amount. Like there is no number one winner. It's just there's a group of winners. But I like doing that because it's like basically like even odds. Like that's kind of what I look for when I bet. Like I just want to bet an even bet, and that's kind of what that is. Like you have a 50% chance of winning every single week. So I like to do that. But it's like when I'm not betting, but I'm like kind of betting, that's what I like to do. When I'm betting, I'd rather just bet on games. But if I'm not betting, then I'll do fantasy football, and that to me is straight. But it's gay when you do like daily fantasy football and you enter those contests that are like you put $10 in to win $1 million. You know what I mean? Like, and it's basically like buying a lottery ticket. Like you're never gonna win those contests. Like that shit's fucking gay. Like if you're mad into that. So if you're mad into like if you put $10 in daily fantasy, that shit's gay. Or if you get like mad excited for your season-long fantasy, that shit's gay. But if you're putting down like significant money in daily fantasy football, then that shit's straight. But significant money is the key phrase. When you don't have significant money invested into it though, everything is so arbitrary and people sound so corny when they get all into it. There's nothing I find more pointless and arbitrary than season-long fantasy football. And I think people who obsess over their team or simply start conversations about their team are gay as fuck. Nobody wants to hear about who the fuck you got on your fantasy football team. If I had to rank like other people, what I care about them, like what I care about the most and what I care about the least, I think who's on their fantasy football team might be the thing I care the least about somebody. If fantasy football existed when I was in grade school, I would have been such a problem. I just wouldn't have known how annoying I was. And the minuscule money that I had invested would have felt significant to me. So that's why I get a pass. Like kids are allowed to be gay as fuck. Like all kids are fucking gay. Most kids are gay. You know what I mean? Like most kids are corny as fuck. Like when I was younger, at least I was. When I was younger, I wanted a Shaq jersey for my birthday one year. Like an Orlando Magic Shaq jersey. And like there's a video of me opening up the fucking stupid ass Shaq jersey out of a box and like fucking running around the place. Like I got the Shaq jersey. It's the gayest shit ever and stuff. But like I was 8. You know what I mean? Like I thought that Shaq jersey was going to change my life. But there's like a bunch of shit I would incorporate into this episode. But in unreleased episodes, I've already hit on this topic, like kind of how arbitrary and gay I think fantasy football is. So the fact that I've talked about it on another episode just highlights how important the topic is. But the irony is, I think being mad into fantasy football is the gayest shit ever, and I can't stand listening to people talk about the fantasy football teams. But right now, the Fantasy Sports Talk radio station is my go-to station when I'm driving around. It's an obvious example of how we manifest our realities. Like, of course, everybody's going to talk to me about who they got on their fantasy team when I'm listening to Fantasy Football Talk radio. They think I'm like diehard with this fantasy shit. Like, I live and breathe by my team. So I'm getting what I deserve. I just can't deal with entertaining the basic ass conversations anymore. Like, I'm losing my voice doing it. They're going to make me go crazy again. The one kid in my car the other day, I heard them talking about Sky Moore. He was like, I drafted Sky Moore on my team last year. Like, I couldn't believe he just said that shit to me. It's one thing if they're talking about Christian McCaffrey, and you're like, oh yeah, I drafted Christian McCaffrey on my team last year, which obviously I still think is gay as fuck to point out to the Uber driver. But at least like Christian McCaffrey, like it was your first round pick last year. Like, oh yeah, you had the first pick, and I know he got injured. It didn't really pan out, but then like it kind of worked out at the end of the year. But he's telling me that he drafted Sky Moore. That was like his 13th round pick. Like when I play fantasy football, like I can't even remember who my first and second round. I usually remember my first pick, but I can't remember my second round pick from the year before. He was telling me about his 13th round pick from the previous year. You know what I mean? Like, how could you think that the Uber driver gives a fuck about that shit? And then somebody said to me, I think it was the same kid. He was a nice kid. I feel bad singling him out. But somebody said to me, you hear Joe Burrow got hurt in training camp? Like, nah, I didn't know. Thanks for informing me. I'd say the over-under on how many times I had heard somebody talk about Joe Burrow's injury on that station that day, it had to be a trillion times. I could have told you the name of his doctor. Like, I'm driving around listening to Fantasy Sports Talk Radio. He thinks I haven't heard about the fucking Joe Burrow injury. But this is why I'm the absolute worst and I'm the most ridiculous human being of all time. I'm driving around listening to Fantasy Sports Talk Radio, but I think you're gay as fuck when you talk to me about your fantasy football team. I'm impossible to talk to. You can't say nothing to me. I'm the problem. I get it. It's why I isolate and I say what I want to say on the podcast. I don't bother nobody with it. These are just like nice people finding a relatable topic and starting conversation with their Uber driver. They're normal and I'm the one who has something wrong with him. Like, I get it. I'm not trying to say like I'm the normal one. Everybody else has issues. If you're not talking to me about trying to get my music to Joe Rogan, chances are the conversation between us will have no momentum because I just think everything else is corny as fuck. I just think man conversation is basic as fuck and pointless. But I'm always shocked how willingly people engage in basic ass conversation and how excited they are to do so. But nothing says I'm basic as fuck like telling the Uber driver who you got on your fantasy football team. I don't think I care less about anything in the world than who you got on your fantasy team. But like I said, the reason everyone's telling me who they got is because this is what I'm playing on the radio for the most part. But the thing is, like, I'm barely even paying attention when it's on. I'm in my head. I'm just, like, thinking when I drive. Like, I do a lot of thinking, and that's why I have a lot to talk about on podcasts. Because, like, when I'm driving a lot of time, I'm just thinking, and then I just write down what I'm thinking about because it's stuff I like to talk about on the podcast. But I'm not going to play nothing in the car and have awkward silence with the passengers in the car when I drive around. So the question is, what am I supposed to listen to? Specifically, if I want minimal conversation with the passenger about what I'm playing. Because that's really ultimately the goal. I'm not fucking trying to have a conversation with the passenger. I'm just trying to drive them from point A to point B. But, like, music's out of the question of something I could play because it's so hit or miss. Like, I wouldn't want to play music because, like, people get offended when certain music is on. And it's not like I ever listen to music anyway, so I don't even have any music in the car to put on, like other than Stern Worm CDs. I'd have to go to the radio, but I wouldn't even know what type of music to turn on or what station it's on. So I like to listen to talk radio because it's like more neutral than music. And if the passenger like isn't into the topic, specifically sports, because that's what I have playing, they can just tune it out. But what talk radio can I listen to without having to field a million questions? Because apparently the answer isn't sports. I definitely would listen to Rogan's podcast, but like even before I started driving, I knew not to make the mistake of putting on Joe Rogan's podcast. Because before I knew that people even like to start conversations with the Uber driver, because I didn't even really realize that was a thing. I just knew if I put on Rogan's podcast, that would spark a conversation because his podcast moves the needle too much. And I don't want that type of conversation. Otherwise, I would just play his podcast and listen to that every day when I drive around. I'd be able to listen to every episode. And honestly, that's what I would want to do. I listen part-time to the podcast right now because I really don't have enough time to hear every episode. But if I was playing it when I was driving around, I could literally go through every single episode. But like by myself, the only talk radio I listen to is sports. So obviously when I have passengers in the car, that's what I'm going to turn on. That's what I'm going to gravitate to. Plus, I think it just makes sense. Like, you hop in the cab and the driver has on sports. But right now, it's like the heart of the summer, and there's no good stations to listen to because, like, there's no sports really on right now. Ideally, I just want to play live events, like throw some game on. Like, that's what I love to do. Like, whenever there's an event on, I love to throw it on. But, like, I talked about it on my Bracket Busted episode. Like, people would get in the car and they're like, big college basketball fan, and how I thought that question is just so fucking stupid because you hear I have the fucking games on. I must be a fan of college basketball, but I like to just have the live event going on, whatever it is. At that time, it was the March Madness, and that's why I had March Madness on, because it was the live event that was going on, whether I like college basketball or not. So I had on college basketball. So that's the answer. Yeah, I have on. I'm not technically a big college basketball fan. I have it on because it's March Madness. But so I was saying I won't even be able to put on Wimbledon when that's on because I can't even field questions. Big tennis fan, you know what I mean? Like, it would just sound so stupid when they said that to me. So what I ended up doing was when Wimbledon, it was recently on, when I didn't listen to like the preliminary rounds, but like when the championship was on, I legitimately had it playing in my car in between rides. When I would pick up a passenger, I would just switch to Fantasy Sports Talk Radio. You know what I mean? Because I couldn't even listen to them say to me, "Oh, you're a big tennis fan?" But so like a week later, the British Open was on, so I had that on, and it was so fucking annoying. A bunch of people were like, "Big golf fan?" And I just said, "Yeah, I like golf," because I do like golf, but I'm not like a big golf fan. But baseball's like the only major sport right now that's in the midst of its season. And I don't listen to baseball games because I did used to listen to baseball games like earlier in the season, but people cannot comprehend the fact that I'm listening to the baseball game, but I'm not a fan of either team. They would just get mad confused when they're like, "Which team you rooting for?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm not a fan of either team." And then it just gets like silent, you know what I mean? They're like perplexed. I had the game on, but like I'm not a fan of either team. It's like I threw a wrench into their operating system. And the MLB network is just too boring for me to listen to while I drive. Like I can't listen to baseball talk. I don't know half the players, and I don't follow baseball like that. But that would ideally be the network I listen to right now because they're coming down the final stretch of the season, but I'm not even going to listen to it. And then the NBA station is whack as fuck right now because like it's in the off season and free agency is already come to an end. I like Brian Scalabrine and Frank Isola. I think they're mad funny. So like them I could still listen to, but they're just like 2 hours in the morning. I don't turn on the college sports station at this time of year either. And I think that like counting down the days of the football season, like only 54 days left to kickoff. That mentality is like gay as fuck. But like my sports mind frame right now has shifted towards football. But the NFL network is unbearable. It's probably the most boring shit in the history of the universe. Russia and China probably play continually as like their harshest form of torture. It's trash during the season, but like it's even worse now. It's like good football talk, I guess. And like the good football talk like they have is still boring. But right now, it's all interviews. They interview a player. Every player feels great. Coach is like, "Yeah, we look great at practice." Also, like, it's a lot of contract talk right now on the NFL Network. Specifically for, like, linemen and obscure players that I've never heard of that, like, trying to make a team. And even though I think obsessing over your season-long fantasy football team is the gayest shit ever, fantasy football talk radio is essentially just ranking players at the skill positions, like the main positions. The guy, if you don't know anything about football, the guy who passes it, the guy who runs it, and the guy who catches it. Like those are the main positions. Like it's not the linemen, it's the players that we all know, and it's basically just ranking all those players. So who doesn't want to hear a bunch of quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receiver rankings going into the season? Specifically now because they're like setting the initial rankings. I can't stomach engaging in conversation about fantasy football, but it's relatively interesting to listen to sports radio hosts talking about it. And right now it's August, so everybody's like gearing up for fantasy football drafts. So the fantasy football station kind of peaks at this time while other stations are in a lull. It's actually like a good place to kind of get back into the football mind frame, to catch up on off-season free agency, find out like who landed where from some of the second tier players that kind of go under the radar, and like who's expected to be impactful players this year. Like Bijan Robinson, the running back on the Falcons. He used to be the running back at Texas last year, Texas University. But he's like a first round pick in fantasy football. Like that lets you know, like, oh shit, Bijan's gonna be like a major player this year. Like I wouldn't have known that. I would have thought that he was gonna be good, but I would have thought he was gonna split time with Tyler Algier in the backfield. But I learned from listening to the station, oh no, like Bijan is like the go-to. But I don't really have to listen to the station. I could just look at rankings. I would be like, oh shit, he's ranked number 3rd on the rankings this year in the projections. But since it's like the main positions, the skill positions, it's all players I know. So it's always fun to like rank who's the best. It's just like a basic ass conversation though. Like a real football conversation. Someone who really knows football will talk to you about who has a strong line or who has an improved secondary. Like that's what they talk about on the NFL Network. That's the shit I'm not trying to tune into. I don't give a fuck. But fantasy football draft talk is good conversation for people who follow the NFL but don't necessarily know anything about football. I put myself in that grouping. I put the majority of fantasy football players in that grouping. But it all adds up to me listening to Fantasy Sports Talk Radio because it's by far the most interesting station to listen to right now. Even though I think it's gay as fuck when people are mad into their fantasy football teams. So I'm driving around listening to this on the radio, but I think you're unbearable if you start talking to me about who you got on your team. So like I said, I know I'm the problem. There's something wrong with me as a person. I'm a disruption to the norm. Like, the world is probably a better place without me. The passengers in my car are just nice people trying to start a friendly conversation with their Uber driver who has deep-rooted issues. Part of my job, though, is entertaining these conversations without being rude. Like, I mean, if you want comedy, if you could get the recordings of the conversations in my car, like, that's what comedy is right there. I mean, you could hear me in the front seat saying, oh, wow, you got Josh Jacobs in the 3rd round? Oh, and you got Fields in the 6th? Damn, man, you had a good draft. But, like, I just don't like explaining myself when they ask if I've drafted yet. And that's what's really funny, because I literally don't even playing any season-long fantasy football teams this year. So they think I'm, like, focused trying to figure out who I want to draft on my team, but I don't even have a team. Like, me and my friends, we used to have a league back at home, and I would still want to do that. And specifically, like, the reason I want to do it is because it just keeps me in touch with everybody. Like, that's why I liked it when I used to play it. Like, back in the day, I got banned from the league. But then, like, I started to notice, like, as I got older, I was like, oh, I barely even talk to my friends anymore. So I was like, oh, I kind of, like, want to get back into the league. So I got back into the league. And then nobody gave a fuck about the league. So we just stopped doing it a few years ago. But that's the one league I would ideally want to keep playing. But that league is done. And that was really the only season-long fantasy football league I played in. So, like, I want to play in it because just to stay in touch with my friends, not because I give a fuck about playing season-long fantasy football. But these people that drive my car think I'm, like, fucking obsessed with fantasy football. One popular thing that people say to me as they get out of the car, like, people who didn't start a conversation about fantasy with me, they get out of the car and they're like, good luck with your fantasy team this year. Like, that's what they say to me, like, as kind of like a friendly exchange of pleasantries. That's why I'm like, oh yeah, I don't have a fantasy football team. That shit's gay as fuck. But the worst is the fucking losers who call into the fantasy football station to talk about their teams. Like, I don't want to generalize a group of people, but 100% of people who call into fantasy football radio stations are losers. And that's backed up by science, because if you're winning in life, you wouldn't sit on hold for an hour to talk to a radio host about your fantasy football team. It's not possible. So you have to be a loser if you call up and talk to the fantasy football host about your team, unless you're like winning in life and they brought you on as a special guest. And everybody's mind frame is like taking it mad serious right now because everybody's preparing for the draft. But like the game plan, like they always talk about game plan. They're like, don't drink on draft day. And the people are like, drink on draft day? I would never. They're like, I bring 230 cases with me every single draft. We do an in-person draft. I always bring 230 packs with me just to get everybody else fucked up. Like, I'm so sure I couldn't draft the fucking fantasy football team while I'm drinking. Specifically when I have all the rankings in front of me and I still remembered what players I want to draft. But popular advice, and like they have a clip of one of their hosts playing it when they cut to commercials, like you have to divorce yourself from the fan mindset, because like they get scared that people are gonna just want to draft who they like on their favorite teams, and then they're just gonna draft all those players and they're gonna pick a bad fantasy team. I mean, it's a $50 season-long league. If they want to pick all their players, fucking pick all their players. Like, at least now they have a little more stock in who's on their favorite team and shit. But I don't know what's gayer, being a diehard fan rooting for a team or being crazy about your fantasy football team. But the draft is like these people's Super Bowl. It's like their big day. If someone's drafting at home by themselves, their wife will never hear the end of it if she barges in when they're in the middle of drafting. And that's not to act like girls don't play fantasy football. And girls are exponentially gayer than guys with this shit when they play fantasy football, because like they think it like proves that they're like a cool ass chick. They're like, I bet you thought I knew nothing about football because I'm a girl, didn't you? Nah, I didn't give a fuck whether you did or didn't know anything about football. And playing fantasy football doesn't mean you know anything about football. You could win your league and still know nothing about fucking football. There's player projections every week readily available to everybody. But I don't need her to prove that she actually does know football. I just don't fucking care. Give me a girl who wants to prove to me how much she likes sucking dick. The way you know you're in a gay marriage is if you and your spouse manage a fantasy football team together. That's the gayest shit. But the knowledge that you need to keep up with fantasy football is virtually nothing. You don't need to have any actual football knowledge. You just have to look at player rankings every week, which are available everywhere. Fantasy football would be like totally different if everyone had to do it blind without looking at player rankings. Like, that would be totally different. You know what I mean? Like Bijan Robinson, like I said, he's a rookie, but he's a first round pick. If people didn't have rankings in front of them, most people wouldn't know Bijan Robinson's a first round pick. You know what I mean? So that's why fantasy football is like gayer than ever. Like 20 years ago, when fantasy football was still relatively new and the internet wasn't what it is right now, like, you would actually have to kind of formulate opinions on your own. Right now, you're not really formulating opinions on your own. But I'm not impressed when someone does formulate opinions on their own. I'm not impressed by anybody's football knowledge. I don't give a fuck about it. And when a girl wants to rattle off her football knowledge to me, I get nauseous. But yeah, I like girls who like to suck dick and eat pussy, not a girl who knows everything about football. Back to the people call up the station. Right now, like, it's so pathetic. Everybody's calling up to talk about strategy for the upcoming draft, or how, like, their recent draft played out. Like, I won't lie, it is interesting. Like, when you have a draft, like, drafts are fun. Like, they're fun when you partake in it. Specifically, auction drafts. Auction drafts are mad fun. And they're, like, interesting to you who you got in every round, but they're not interesting to other people. But these losers will call up and go through with the host, like, who they took round by round. They're like, in the second round, I got Nick Chubb, and host like, ooh, good pick. Like, I mean, they're just picking the next player on the board. Like, I mean, it's not rocket science over here. But, like, these are grown adults, some of who presumably have families. But I literally think that people call up to feel like they're part of a community. I would say the gayest shit that callers do is some callers, they make like a parody song. Like, if they lost by like 3 points and one player cost them the game, they'll like make the song about him. You know what I mean? The next day and shit. It's the gayest shit ever. They leave it on like voicemail, like the host play, like it's hilarious. But like, not coincidentally, one of the hosts the other day was doing a poll with the callers, what they eat with their buffalo wings, ranch or blue cheese. The poll fucking broke the phone lines. Gay people love those type of debates. They love, like, if you love playing fantasy football, you love fucking arguing whether it's blue cheese or ranch with your wings. Dude, it's wings, blue cheese all day. The same people flip out. They hear you put ketchup on your hot dogs. Ketchup on a hot dog? It's a cardinal sin. They complain that you can't get a good slice of pizza anywhere outside the tri-state area. God forbid you tell them that you've never seen The Sopranos. They fucking lose their mind. You've seen The Sopranos. Dude, everyone's seen The Sopranos. Do you have HBO? It's that like ball-busting energy. I just think it's corny as fuck. This is why I've removed myself from society. I'm not fun to be around. You can't say nothing to me without me rolling my eyes. But yeah, that's it. That's really what I want to say about fantasy football. And to cap it off, I'll put it like this. 2 homosexual men engaging in intercourse is straight. But 2 heterosexual men talking about who they got on their fantasy football team is gay as fuck. Star of her. Trip of a lifetime. Let's fucking go.